Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Atlanta Divorce Law Group session of We Won't Back Down, where myself, Sarah Kaki, and our litigation manager, Jeanette Soltis, try to join you every Monday night and give back to the community in these kind of crazy times we're all going through. And the past ones we've done have really been about the coronavirus, but right now there's something that lies really, really heavy on all of our hearts, which is all the hate crime that we've seen out there and all the police brutality towards the Black community, which isn't a new thing, but it has come really to all of our attention, and it's all over the news. It's all over our streets right now, especially here in Atlanta. And so Jeanette and I, as parents of young children, really felt a sense of responsibility to bring this up and have a conversation about it, because a lot of our clients are parents as well, and we'd imagine they're struggling with the same thing we're struggling, which is how do we have this conversation with our children? How do we talk to our children about what they're seeing in the news right now? How do we answer their tough questions about what does Black Lives Matter mean? Why should that even be written anywhere? And why are all these things happening? We are so grateful and blessed to have joining us tonight Adalia Ellis. Adalia has a master's in teaching. She has been a classroom elementary teacher for 8 years. She is a mother of a 7-year-old herself. She spent her college years directing dance and social action programs for preteens, and she's currently the business and executive director of Aroha Afro-Latin Dance, LLC, and she's also the organizer of Convergence Symposium, which is a space for people who are currently active in social action or applying the arts to make that impact. And so she's really a mastermind behind teaching the young people, teaching preteens and children, and now she even does it with adults, how to learn about racial and social interaction and activism through blending the arts. So Adalia, thank you so, so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Jeanette, I know that I just wanted to take a second before you and I start shooting away at questions, Adalia, because we're coming in here not as attorneys. We're coming in here taking our attorneys' hats off as concerned parents. I have an 8-year-old son who is a Middle Eastern boy who looks very Middle Eastern. I have a 5-year-old daughter. Jeanette, you have an adopted mixed son, and we were on the phone and we're like, how do we need to bring this up to them. We need them to understand what's going on. We want to be the source where they get the information, but we don't want to get this wrong. We want to make sure we get this right, and we want to do it responsibly, because so many of us want to make an impact. We want to make a change, and hopefully by getting this right with our children, we can start there. So Jeanette, did you want to add anything to sort of how we feel about this and where you and I started this whole conversation? Jeanette, do you hear me?
I'm having some internet issues. Just so you know, if I don't respond, my internet is freezing up. So
you're good. I just want to see, do you have anything you wanted to add about where this conversation started for you? Because as a mother of an adopted son, a mixed son, this is a big issue for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my son's biracial, and and both ate. And so it's been a conversation that's come up very early on, because the differences, our skin were obvious, and talking about embracing differences. But at his age now, he just turned 10, and it's that transition between having the easy conversations about embracing differences and look, isn't your skin beautiful, and so's mine, and here are how we're different and also the same. Now it's these hard questions of police brutality.
Oh no, we're losing you, Jeanette.
Hatred and is. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Is some guidance on how do you move to informing kids who are old enough to start understanding these things and answer their difficult questions without them becoming fearful and anxious. And I want my son to be informed. I want him to feel empowered and make a difference, but I don't want him to be scared. I'm getting emotional just talking about it. I want
So Adalia,
to
Jeanette, I'm sorry you cut off, but I feel your emotion from here, and you're going to make me tear up as well. Dalia, I think Jeanette is really sharing the emotion of so many parents right now. And where do we start? Let's just start there. Where do we start this conversation? What are some initial thoughts you have on this?
Well, I mean, so like in my house, we don't really watch the news. Like there isn't any news playing. So unless my husband and I actually start a conversation with him, he's not seeing what's happening right now. And so I think that in my house, we have ongoing conversations about race. It hasn't been just attached to an event, because my husband is white and my son is white presenting. So I'm mixed. And I mean, from the time he was born, I would get like triple looks when I go out with him, and people look at him and they look at me, and he's definitely, he's white presenting. And so, I mean, very early on, we started having conversations about race, and he would look at pictures of my father, who was Black, and my mother, who was white. And, and we would talk about that, my father being Black, he had a different experience and than his dad, my husband. And these conversations started as young as like 4 and 5. Like it doesn't have to be, children are very, children are very clear, right? Like they don't, when we think about children, we're thinking about things from our perspective as adults, having lived through life and maybe gotten jaded or had somebody get offended or angry at us for saying something. We get very intellectual and potentially emotional about it. But remember that for children, none of that is happening. Like, this is all brand new to them. So everything is very matter of fact, like, yes. I mean, we introduced slavery. My son understands that people who had skin like my father, and even me, if I were alive during that time, like that's the life I would have lived. I would have been a slave during that time. It didn't matter that, that one of my parents were white. And, that's a deep thing to have a conversation with a child about. But at the end of the day, where you start is with your heart, and where you start is really helping our children to understand that, yes, we are one human race. And yes, the standard is that we are one human family. And that regardless of the color of our skin and regardless of our hair texture, underneath it all, we're all the same. Like, we all bleed red. We all have hearts and lungs, and we all have the potential to be good people. And you have the potential to be a good person, just like mommy or daddy does, right? It's all about choices. And then being able to frame it around, there are some people who are choosing not to see that we're all one human family. They're making this choice, maybe, because they don't feel powerful within themselves. And so they feel like they have to make other people feel bad or make other people feel lower. So they make this choice to hurt others. But it doesn't reflect on me as a parent or you as my child. Their choice is with them. But, but then you teaching your children, you learning yourself, and then teaching your children how to maneuver and how to see the world through the lens of oneness, but still see diversity in that oneness, right? That like, so you definitely want to avoid things like being colorblind. I don't see race. I don't see color. Um, that actually is dismissive of, and it doesn't allow our children to embrace the idea that we can all have different eye colors and different skin colors and different hair textures and still be one human family, right? That, you know, because children are very, like I said, they're very kind of matter of fact. They're looking and they say, if you ask a child, I don't know if you guys have ever had this happen before, where you be like, yes, this person is black. And they're like, no, they're actually brown, right? Or
Yes.
like, this person is white. Well, no, they're actually peach. So like in their mind.
Adalia, I have that happen. I don't know if you guys ever played Guess Who with your kids. You know, it's the game where you're trying to guess who the faces are. And I will say something like, is your person a black person? And then my Rami's like, I don't know which one of these qualifies as the black person. And I'm like, you're right. This is actually, that was not a good question. But right. Yeah, playing Guess Who really shows you how we've been trained to start classifying all these different things, whereas to them, they're like, this isn't black. That's not white. Well, what is this? You know, and you're like, yes. Well, that's Hispanic looking. And they're like, what? So what you're saying is that we are adding this adult garbage to the conversation from our own guilt and shame of how we feel about this, and maybe even painful experiences we've had with this subject, whether it's coming at it from a black person who's faced this, been the victim of it, or a white person who's been really uncomfortable about it. We're bringing that adult pain to the conversation, whereas the children don't see that. Is that what I'm understanding you're saying?
I think it would be true for white parents, and that would be true. I think for black parents and parents of children of color, like, you know, Hispanic children, it becomes a conversation of life or death. So it's very different conversation for parents whose children are less likely to be seen as adults when they're 12. You know, like Tamir Rice, the young man who was outside playing with a play gun in the playground, and someone called the police and said there's a black man, or there's a man outside with a gun, and, you know, the police show up and they shoot him. I mean, within 10 seconds of arriving, they never even said anything to him. So for parents that have children who have darker skin, and historically and even now in the present, they are at risk. It's a different conversation, right? So like the parents, and it's a hard one to have, and it's a heartbreaking one to have. And my husband, it's amazing. Like, he's had this conversation with my son, who's white presenting, but basically said to him, you know, when you hang out with your black friends, when you guys get older, there are things you should not do because it puts them in danger. Or there's things that, you know, that if they do it and you're with them, it's important that you stand up for your friend. Like, it's a different conversation for my son, who's white presenting, than his friend's parents, who his black friend's parent. And so I think that the guilt and shame that might come with white families, that is definitely something that children pick up on, and that discomfort to have that conversation, it is affected by that feeling of shame and guilt, and the children, they pick up on it, and so then and so I think it's important. It's a two-way street And I think it's a lot for parents to take in right now. You're like, oh, I've got to do this and I got to do that, And so I do want to say in just a second, like just some very simple things, um, but I think if there is interest after we have done this, I am developed a workshop that can kind of really work with parents and as individuals to work through those feelings. Because those same feelings come with you into the room with African American people, right? Like that's where this hesitancy to have conversations about race with our Black peers come from, is this sense of guilt and shame, and you don't want to acknowledge it because of how it makes us, makes white people feel. But then that feeds into this constant cycle of what we're seeing now. And so there is a part of this of parents addressing their own burden, like their own baggage, but it has to almost be happening simultaneously now because things are starting to speed up. I mean, we don't have the luxury anymore to not have this conversation. So parents are needing to do dual things. We're needing to work on ourselves in one way, and so we can show up for our children as examples of striving and as examples of discomfort. And I think, so just to keep things simple, I would say one is to acknowledge to your children, this is a really uncomfortable topic for me to talk to you about. I feel really sad. I'm tearing up. I feel really sad to be having this conversation with you. But it's important that we have this conversation. I don't want you to feel sad because mommy's feeling sad, but I want you to understand that it's hard for me. And but them seeing you be vulnerable and you being willing to acknowledge it makes them feel like, okay, it's okay. And then you can have the conversation. And then, but I think simple things like playing games. I really love that idea of playing that game because that helps you learn from your children how they're seeing the world. But then that game can actually turn into a conversation. Another thing you can do with kids is using imagery. So, for example, there was this picture going around on Facebook of an elderly woman. She was on a subway and she was standing and she was all hunched over. You could tell that she couldn't stand up straight. And there were all these young people sitting down, listening to their phones or playing with things on their phone. And this woman is holding on to this pole for dear life, this elderly woman. And so my son and we sat down and I said, describe to me this picture. What do you see? And he said, oh, I see an old woman standing. I was like, okay. And what else do you see? Well, I see, people sitting. And then we start getting into this conversation about, well, what would you do if you were on a subway? You saw this elderly woman standing up there. What would you do? I would get up and give her my seat. Right? We didn't have to go into the deep, dark, we didn't have to go deep, dark with it. It was just very kind of matter of fact. And I think that is a good place to start with our really young ones, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a really great place to start. But like the 10-year-olds and the 11-year-olds and the 12-year-olds, as they get older, having more nuanced conversations will be helpful for them because then they're also dealing with their peers. And their peers are going to be coming to their classrooms with completely different things. And you want to be the first one on the front lines to be like, no, this is not how this family.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way. My son, Middle Eastern, Muslim family, and he had a whole different story on what happened in 9/11 than what really happened. And it was all from what he had heard from a classmate of his. And he came home and told us, this is what happened on 9/11. And we're like, okay, how do we undo this? I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's,
No,
that's
but that was
a very hard
perfect.
lesson learned.
That was perfect. And I think that seeing those interactions as opportunities, our children are resilient. If we were not resilient as children, we would not be here. I don't think either any of us sitting here right now having this conversation, none of us can say that there wasn't something that happened in our lives when we were children that was really difficult for us to live through, but we did, because we were all created resilient. So our children are resilient, and our children are and we can help them to, I love the word being, having constructive resilience. So we can help them to be constructively resilient and be able to hear what people say to them and not let it become part of how they see themselves. And a big part of that is them being able to talk to you and you being open to having the conversation, rather than, them coming home and saying, oh, this happened at school. I saw somebody do this to this Black child, or someone do this to this white child. And you're saying, oh, we don't see color. That's not a conversation. It's not a conversation for them, because it doesn't help them to work through the emotions of what they saw. It ends the conversation at that very moment. And I think particularly for children who are biracial, I'm mixed as well. So these conversations are very important, because we don't show up in the world as Black or white, right? And we show up in the world kind of like in this in between. People think I'm Hispanic. People have thought I was Iranian. When I was in Ethiopia, people thought I was Ethiopian. It's just like, so for biracial children, it's a double-edged sword. The world wants you to choose a box, but there is no box.
Yeah.
In reality, there is no box. Like, the truth of it is that there is no box. This racism and race is a completely human mind created construct. And it was constructed, and this is in history, you can find this. It was actually constructed through pseudoscience. And it was right during the slave trade, where it was important to be able to legitimize enslaving human beings. So the pseudoscience developed of the Negroid and the Magroid, and measuring the circumference of people's heads and being able to say, okay, these brain size make them less intelligent. If they have darker skin, they have more, ape looking features, they're closer to apes, and therefore they're less intelligent, right? This was a construct developed specifically to allay the concerns of white people who had questions about slavery. And it legitimized slavery, because if you can undermine the humanness of a person, then it makes it easier to enslave them. And so this whole construct was all based on, money. It was all based on.
So, Adalia, do you go that far back in history with your son, with your 7-year-old, when you explain race to him? Is there, at what age is it appropriate to go through the social construct of race, and that it has no scientific bearing, real biological bearing in anything?
I don't really think, I feel like around 7 years old, children begin to, up until 7, things are very kind of very emotion driven. And I saw this when I was teaching classes, elementary school, kindergarten, 2nd grade, I call it the magic time. It's the magic year. Like, they're right in between, they're losing their teeth and they're excited about it.
Yeah.
They're, but they're starting to really think. So things are becoming less emotional and they're starting to become a bit more intellectual. And I think honestly, around 7 or 8, you can start having that conversation. I mean, when you link it to science, and because they take science in school, link it to history because they take social studies in school. I mean, it's not like it's out of the realm of understanding for them. And it's a nice way for them to be able to. So I think you and I, we were talking yesterday, Sarah, I was saying this, if you can connect what's happening now to history, it doesn't feel so like random and out of their control. And it's not as scary if you can say, you know what, this has been going on for a really long time. And I can tell you exactly where it started, and I can tell you exactly why. And it removes this sense of like not discomfort, but
would it remove the anxiety that Jeanette's concerned about?
Yes, you're removing that anxiety. I feel like because things are getting so, like right now, my son isn't affected by it. But I think we're going to come to a point where that's not going to be, we aren't going to have that choice anymore. And I think the lengths to which we can educate our children to understand that this is a part of a 400, 500, 600 years in the making. This is not just today, honey. Like this is really old. And I think it will help them, it'll help ground them in understanding what is happening around them. And it won't seem so scary. It'll be scary. It'll probably still be scary, but at least it's scary and they can talk to you about it. Right. But there's nothing worse than being scared and you can't talk to your parents about it. And your parents, they want to pretend that none of this is really happening and that it doesn't come from somewhere, but it really does. I mean, African Americans and Native Americans are dealing with historical traumas that, I mean, it's been scientifically proven that the cells carry we carry in our very cells the experiences of our ancestors, right? So we carry that with us. So you have all this generational trauma happening for Native American and African American communities. But then you also honestly have a generational trauma happening for white communities as well. Because can you imagine the mental place, psychological place that white people had to go to over generations to be able to enslave people?
Right.
I mean, like that's completely, if you're a spiritual person, that's completely at odds with, like, at some point, as children, white people knew that this was not right.
Yeah.
But then society, like how the system was set up and the teaching by their parents and their all the people who look like them said to them, this is the way things are done. And so can you imagine trying to undo that as well?
So it's like they generationally had to kill the human instinct within them, the heart within them over and over again. They had to crush that part and not listen to that little conscious voice inside of them.
Yes.
That's deep. I'd never heard anybody put it that way before.
Yes. So, so you have, no wonder the conversation is hard for white people. Right? Because like the guilt and shame around that who knows that was not carried through cellular memory from those family members who went along to get along. Like, because white people who back in the day who did not agree with this, they weren't safe either. So, and women who had to be silent. I mean, there's just historical trauma here all around. And I think to be able to stop a cycle, we have to have the courage as parents to be the ones to do it. And sometimes we have to be the ones to have the hard conversation within ourselves so that our children don't have to have the hard conversation later in life, right? So so it's like I said, there's like this dual thing happening right now where we get to look at ourselves and become more aware, but then we also need to be having these conversations with our children and not bringing that shame and that guilt with it. So that, we as parents, as white parents become allies, their children become allies. And then you have like a whole bunch of people becoming allies, and that's awesome. Like, we need more white allies. I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, we really need more white allies. And
that's a question I have for you is, I know that many white people, including myself, sometimes are scared to speak up and say the wrong thing. And I believe feedback and learn from that. But I believe that I know there are a lot of people who aren't speaking up because they're just scared to offend and scared to say the wrong thing. So what advice do you have for those of us who really want to be your allies, but are scared of making missteps?
So I say this completely acknowledging I'm one person. And there are things that people can say that don't offend me because I see people trying. Like, I'd rather see someone trying and making a mistake than being silent and doing nothing, right? That's just me personally. I can't speak for all other Black people. And me being mixed, I don't have the same experience. I'm very light-skinned, obviously. I don't have the same experience as my darker skinned friends. And so I can't speak for them, but I mean, I feel like one trying is and then, so here's the thing. This is when the rubber hits the road, right? It is trying and making a mistake, but then being open to getting the feedback. I think part of it is that I have seen instances where white people have tried, and then, a Black person kind of, call them out on it. And instead of saying, let me hear what they're saying, let me listen, let me ask for feedback, it becomes defensive. It becomes, how dare you? I'm a champion of Black people.
Well, that's where our guilt and shame kicks in, because as soon as we get it wrong and we quickly feel like, oh my God, I was seen. Are they going to think I'm a racist? Do they think I'm on the wrong side? And maybe that cellular membrane guilt and shame kicks in that you were talking about earlier.
And so I think that some of it, oh man, like the guilt and shame, man, I think it's deep. And I think in those moments where you try and you may not get it right the first time, and I hope you have a friend who will say to you, that wasn't the best way to do X, Y, Z, because that's love. I mean, in my opinion, if someone says to you, and especially if they're a friend of yours and they say to you, that wasn't necessarily the best idea, they're saying it out of love. And then being able to hear that and then ask for feedback. Well, how could I have done that differently? And, what I'm trying to learn, like acknowledging I don't know everything. I need to learn this. This is not, white people have not been forced to deal with this on a daily basis. So in many ways, like, white communities are woefully behind the Black community because they've had, the Black communities had to deal with this on a daily basis. And it was like something Sarah and I talked about, like the civil rights movement. Yes, there were white people who showed up for the civil rights movement and they were beaten up like Black people. You had the young man who was shot with his other two friends in Mississippi. I mean, you had a white woman who was also shot. I think she was in Alabama. She was shot. So there were white people who rose during the civil rights movement. But white people get to go home, right? Like you get to go home to a community that isn't steeped in historical trauma in the way that historical trauma is steeped in for Black and Native American communities. So it shows up differently, that trauma. But the trauma in these communities is really real. And so white people don't have to keep having this conversation. Like you actually have to like intentionally have this you have to actually make sure you have the conversation, because you could literally go through most of your life, and unless a protest happens or unless another Black person dies, it's completely possible to think that everything is fine. Meanwhile, in the Black community, this is happening all the time. Like you get no break from it. And I think that's part of it too, is I know that the Black community, I don't know how many people of African descent right now are open to white people coming to them and saying, what can I do?
Yeah.
Because we're tired. Folks are tired. Like it's emotionally draining when we see a person of African descent die on video. That's PTSD. I've stopped watching videos. I have not even bothered. I can't bring myself to watch the movie. I think it was When They See Us or something about the young men who were arrested for raping and beating up, and then turns out years later they were exonerated. I can't even watch that. There's so many people who of African descent. That's when I understood how deep the trauma was that people wanted to support this effort to tell the story of these Black men, but a lot of us could not bring ourselves to watch it because it was traumatizing and traumatizing and traumatizing over and over again. So like in the middle of this trauma, to have our white friends come to us and say, what can I do? And you're like, dude, I've been seeing this like every day of my life. How could you not have seen this? I think too, there's just a lot of people are working through so much emotion right now. So I feel like this is a great opportunity for white parents and white friends who truly want to become allies to begin talking together.
You're about to hear a bunch of kids and dogs. I'm sorry.
You're bouncing around the whole time. I don't know if you heard my son, but he's been out, doing stuff. But I think now is a perfect time for woke white people who really want to be allies and who really want to know how to do this work, that you guys begin coming together the way Black people have had to come together for hundreds of years, and begin to have these conversations. There's wonderful materials being developed. White Fragility is a great book to read. There's you could have an action-oriented book club where you really begin, because I think that at this point, to truly be a white ally at this point is to show up ready to do the work, not to show up asking what to do or what can I do, but to show up and say, hey, I'm here. I'm ready. Let's go together. And I'm open to feedback from you about how I do this. But I've begun to deconstruct my the white supremacy that is we just breathe in this country. I'm beginning to deconstruct that. I'm beginning to decolonize my thinking so that I can be in this space with you and really be a true ally to you. And I think that's what would be really helpful right now to the Black community, and honestly speaking, to the country. Like, I hate to be like all, oh, but like, seriously, I mean, I think that the American nation really needs white allies. Like, you have enough. There has to be a massive movement of white people who take this on as their own. They don't see this as a Black person's problem. They see it as our problem, not just white people's problem, but a humanity, our problem as humans. But this is the role I get to play as a white person. And this is the role they get to play as Black people. But together, those roles are complementary. And
that's such an important conversation for us to have with our kids,
yes,
and especially in talking about the difference between talking to our white kids versus our Black kids or mixed kids.
Yes.
For our white kids, we really need to instill, have a responsibility to help change this.
Yes. And it empowers them.
Adalia, one of the hardest parts for me on all this is the police brutality part. And it feels like, children, they love retribution, especially at the age my children are at. My 5-year-old and 8-year-old, that's not fair is every other word out of their mouth, right?
Yes.
And who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy?
Yes.
One night, mom is the bad guy, dad's the good guy. Every situation has a bad guy and a good guy. So my conflict with this as a parent is this. I know a lot of cops, our firm has represented a lot of wonderful, wonderful people from the armed forces and police forces. And so I don't want to paint a picture to my children that cops are bad, cops are evil. There's been a lot of situations where cops have actually saved my father's life when he was, held at gunpoint at his convenience store, sort of thing, right? So I respect them, I appreciate them, but I know that police brutality is a real thing, and there are real bad cops out there, just like there's bad attorneys out there, there's bad teachers out there, there's bad people inside of our congregations, right? But there is this, I'm concerned about how to present the police brutality part, since I don't want my kids to be fearful of police, but yet they need to be aware. They need to learn how to, be aware of, I can't, blindly trust anybody. And that's not the real world, that everything is going to be fair. And it feels a little bit like telling them, the tooth fairy isn't real, Santa Claus isn't real. and so it feels like you're almost stripping them of their innocence, but you almost have to. So how have you kind of engaged that conversation where you haven't scared them off from police for their own safety when they need it, but yet you're making them wise about it?
That was a hard conversation. Hold on just a sec. Yeah. Okay. Door got closed. Okay. So that was actually a hard conversation, because for the same reason. And my husband actually ends up having a lot of these conversations with my son, which I think is really, there's some reasons why I let that happen in our household. One, because I think him hearing it from his father, who is also white, he's a white man talking to a white presenting child, I think it hits differently. But yeah, that was a hard conversation because of the same thing you just brought up. And I think it goes back to this thing that people make choices. There are some policemen who have made this choice to not use their badge for good. But not all policemen are like this. And regardless, if you're ever in danger, you go to a uniform, right? Because your child is not going to have the opportunity to decide whether or not this policeman is safe or not, right? The first thing is that your safety is very important. You go to a uniform. right? I think for, once again, this conversation is slightly different for Black children. And I think that's why it's really hard for Black parents, because honestly, the way this conversation would be easier is if the police began to change what they were doing. I mean, at the end of the day, like, that's what needs to happen. Like, there has to be a fundamental change in how the climate or whatever in the police, the atmosphere, and the, that the police are in, that because we can prepare our children as much as we want, right? But until there has to be something on the other side of that that proves us wrong, or that it's one of those great things to be proven wrong. Like, yes, every police interaction you've had has been positive. Great. So then what I told you was wrong, and I'm so happy I was wrong about this, right? I think that this is a good opportunity for children to understand the repercussions of choices, right? So this cop chose to treat this person, like this Black person, this way. And look at what's happened. They made this choice. Not only did this man die, but he had 2 children who are now without their father. So, they don't have their dad around anymore. And there are so many people who are hurt and angry about this, that they have now, they're walking in the streets saying things need to change. And they're walking in the streets asking for change. And there's people who don't want change who are joining them and destroying property, right? It can be literally that matter of fact. Like, so you can always bring it back to, choices. So if you're on the playground and you see children bullying a child who is bullying, period, but if you see someone bullying a child who's of a different race, and they're calling them, racial names and stuff, you have a choice in that moment. Do you go to a teacher? Do you have friends in your class that you can get together and you and your friends go and intervene on behalf of that child? I mean, I think framing things as much as possible around choices, and that these choices are with these individuals, is helpful, because it removes it from being everybody is like this, like all police are like this. But if you're able to say this particular policeman was like this, and these 3 police who were with him chose not to intervene, don't be those 3 police, right? They chose not to pull this guy off and say, you can't do that to someone. They didn't choose that. So, things like questions about peer pressure comes up in that space too. So it ends up, it starts out as a conversation about, potentially police brutality, but it really becomes a lesson for us and our children about choices, and figuring out the spaces that we can speak up in, and how we can speak up in those spaces. I feel like, and I think for white children in particular, this is really important. Like, be that person who's videoing, be that person who is yelling, don't stop doing that. Be that person who's like, I see you. I see what you're doing, and, but then, the young lady who did the video of George Floyd, she was 17 years old, and she was scared. Rightfully so. Like, people, sent her all kinds of messages saying, why didn't you intervene? You just video. And she's like, dude, I'm watching this man be murdered in front of me by the cops. And he has my skin color. And you're asking me to go and intervene, and there's 3 other cops standing there watching it. What do you think is going to happen to me? Like, I was scared. I was scared. So, but what we're seeing is happening with some of these protests that are happening is white people are coming in the front and protecting, right? And so we don't want to put our children in a position where they put themselves in harm's way. I get that. Like, none of us want that. And with everything, every fiber of our being, we hope that that is never a situation that our children ever have to be in. And that's never a choice. And if they choose not to intervene because they are worried about their safety, then you know what? That's okay too. Like, don't feel shame about that. If you don't feel like you can come out of this alive and be a witness, sometimes it's better to be a witness than to be another person who's lost your life. And I hate to say it like that, but I think when it comes to Black children, it's a different conversation because honestly, it doesn't matter what they do. And I hate to say it like that, but I mean, you can teach your child to be polite and teach your child to have deference to the police, and you get railroaded. You get put in jail for life for something you didn't do. I mean, and I think that's where, I don't know. I can't, because I think that's the scary thing that a lot of Black parents are realizing. And that's what really hits at the heart of this for Black parents is there's nothing that their children can do. Like if a cop comes around who wants them dead, they want them dead. Like there's nothing that their child can do about it. There's nothing their parents can do about it because the actual system doesn't protect them. So the system itself has to change. And so then the question becomes, as white parents, do you have more leverage than Black parents do to get this stuff to change? And so that these conversations don't have to be what we have with our children anymore. So I think this is where white privilege comes into play. Do white people have more leverage in these spaces to get things to move and change? Because Black people have been asking for it and demanding it for a very long time and nothing has happened. So it's almost like there needs to be a mass of white parents, white allies that have some sort of coalition and you say, I'm sick of having these conversations with my children and I want them to be able to trust the police. So because of that, we want things to change, not just for our children, but for Black children as well. And I feel like this is one of those things that, white parents are just going to have to go all in because you can only do but so much, right? You have no control over what the other person chooses to do. There's a third party there that has a gun and they're completely licensed to use it whenever they want on whoever they want. But particularly with Black people, it's just,
So Adalia, what I'm hearing you saying is Black parents of Black children, and even white parents of Black children like Jeanette, you guys have been forced to have this conversation just by just by the color of your children's skin. And this is not, these events already speed it up and you have to have that conversation quicker. But the people who can really make a difference with having this conversation, that's not just about the life or death of their own child, are the parents of white children.
Yes.
So those are the parents of white children. If they were to use this opportunity to really have a conversation with their children and sort of, to your point, not leave it, just have the conversation and be done, but it now engages a conversation to continuously and consistently have in the household. That's where change can really systematically happen. And my prayer is that when you bring something up to a child, they will hold you accountable to it. So,
oh yes,
my son went to Russia for the World Cup a couple of years ago, and my husband took him through all the World War II stuff, and he's obsessed with World War II now. We can't escape World War II if we wanted to, right? So imagine if this was a conversation about slavery, about the social construct of race. This household could not escape the conversation if it wanted to, because he's going to hold us accountable to everything, and everything he sees, he's going to want it explained. And now the whole household has to keep up with him, and he's going to hold us to it.
Yes.
And that's the prayer we're having for families with white children right now. That's the change that could actually happen.
Yes.
And that's powerful.
That's powerful. You have entire families of allies would be amazing.
How do you talk? I love what you said about using images and games. You really worked with young children with blending the arts to explain racial relations. Can you talk a little bit about how we can do that at home with our children?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, finding books that really, like the book Hidden. There's a book about the movie Hidden Figures. There's actually a children's book about those women. So I think finding books that present that actually there are storybooks that have Black children in them, and it's not just about them being Black. It's about them being children. It's like that's the reason why A Snowy Day is just such a beautiful book by Ezra Keats. It's just this Black child who living in the middle of the city, and he's going outside for a snow day. But it's a beautiful story because it's like this story you don't normally see stories that feature Black children as just being kids like any other kid. So I think finding books like that, I think is a great way to normalize and having friends. I mean, really having true friends who are Black friends, not friends that you see at work. You say, hey, you may have coffee together, and then you go home and you don't really have a conversation. But like friends that come over and you hang out, and then you guys actually have conversations, and you find out that the husband of your friend got stopped by the cops 2 nights ago, just going to the grocery store. Like those are the kind of conversations that you want to start being able to have with your Black friends, that they actually tell you about their lives and you tell them about theirs. But I think normalizing that through books, then there are books that tell the story of the civil rights movement. There are books that tell the story of slavery. I find that stories are a great way to communicate with children, because when you read to them, you ask them questions. Making sure they comprehend what they're getting. So, how are they feeling right now? Where are they in this moment? How do you think you would feel if this happened to you? Or, stories have a great way of bringing to life those things that might be hard to have a conversation from cold turkey. So I think books are a great way. Like I said, this game that we talked about, images are wonderful. Like, you can look at images of, I'm trying to remember, there's this one image that was used during the civil rights movement. And it was a soda fountain. It was a counter in a restaurant, and there was this little Black girl sitting on a stool next to, I think it was a white woman, and then like up on the wall, it was like, no Blacks allowed, or something like this. And just that image alone you can have a whole conversation about that. You pull in history. You've pulled in like the emotional aspect of what they're seeing, the justice aspect of what they're seeing. So I think pictures are a great way to do that. Um, music, music is beautiful. Like there's all kinds of music that tell the story of like of the experience of African Americans, and but then there's also oh my gosh, what is his name? Bob Dylan.
Mhm.
He has songs about, you know, what happened with the men in Mississippi who were killed. And so pulling up music about the that particular situation, and you get to like get the lyrics and listen to the song and even dance to it, and then, you know, you go through the lyrics together and what is the story it's telling. There's an entire rap. There's what was the group? One year I taught a history class at high school level, and we were talking about World War II, I think it was. And my students they never even knew about the internment camps. They didn't know that Japanese people here were basically put into concentration camp. They had no clue about it. And I had students who were really angry. They're like, how am I finding out about this now? You know? But there was this song by Linkin Park
Hmm.
where he tells the story of his grandfather being in an internment camp. And the kids in the class, that was a relevant thing for them because that was a group they knew about. And then, so I think pulling in music is a great way as well. Um, and I just think that being open to having the conversation with your children is the most important aspect of it.
So where are the schools getting this wrong? Because I feel like, I don't know about you, Jeanette, but Logan, did he not learn civil rights stuff about MLK and all that in elementary? Like Rami's learning about Rosa Parks and all that. Is what's missing the conversation at home? Are the schools providing it, but are we failing by not continuing the conversation at home?
Um, the schools give a very whitewashed version of the civil rights movement.
Okay.
And like you come to find out years later that Rosa Parks wasn't tired.
Right. It was all planned.
It was all planned. She knew
Mm-hmm.
exactly what she was doing. So she wasn't just some poor, tired Black woman who just got off work and didn't want to
Right.
get from her seat. Um, the civil rights movement is, and it wasn't the beginning or the end. And I think the way it's taught in school helps to
They build a happily ever after story
That is
around
so
it, correct?
interesting you say that, because my son today isn't here anymore. Like, and he said, like, this is happening again. And it's like, wow, this never ended.
Wow.
But that,
Yeah.
yeah. And that was his perspective, which blew
Yeah.
me
So the
away.
way, and slavery, man, is just, it's just like a blip. It's a blip
Yeah.
in the history books. You spend the majority of the time really learning about white conquest. That's what you spend the majority of the time in history learning about, is white conquest. Native American, blip. So no, the schools, I mean, and I was a social studies teacher, and there is little to no real history. You know, I was a part of the social studies history program. There's little to no that is not considered a core course. Like you could basically, if you didn't have to do, if you had to throw out a subject, history is a subject you can throw out. That's how social studies is treated in school. And children don't experience it in school as a way to learn from the past. They experience it as, got to know these names and these dates for the test. And that's it. You don't learn that, you know, We don't want to keep making these mistakes. We don't want to have these things happen. So we need to learn from the past and make different choices. So because the schools are not really addressing this, it becomes critical that it gets addressed at home because the schools are not doing it.
And they're probably not even getting uncomfortable with it. The teachers probably, you're really leaving it to the teacher's comfort level of what they want to talk about when the kids start asking tough questions.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I don't think, I've come to find out now, I live in South Carolina, so I don't know if it's different in other school districts, but I've come to find out that the young people that I work with that are preteens, they're experiencing the same stuff I was experiencing. They're being treated the exact same way by teachers.
Yeah.
In some cases worse. And I'm thinking, I'm 45 and these kids are 13, 12. Wow. And they're experiencing literally almost exactly the same things I was experiencing in school. So of course, if you have a teacher who's treating her Black students, and she's basically a racist teacher, she's treating her Black, I mean, what do you think she's telling them in history? You know? So yeah, I think right now the school system does not tell the whole story. I mean, I teach a course on the history of Afro-Latin dance and music at the university. And I had students in my university course who had no idea there were slaves in the Caribbean.
Oh, wow.
They thought they were just slaves here in the South. But no, I mean, like, actually the majority of the slaves, the majority of people who were enslaved from Africa were actually brought to the Caribbean. A small, relatively small percentage were brought to America. A lot of people of African descent were brought as slaves to the Caribbean, but they didn't know it. Had no clue. So, I mean, there's so much that is left out of history because so much space is given to white conquest. And until that changes, I mean, the onus really is on parents to, read the books.
So Adalia, how do we have this conversation without imposing our own views on our children? That's the other sensitive part I'm concerned about is I want my child to think for himself. I want him to form his own opinion on what is just, what is fair, and politics. And I think that's the only way I can make him into a critical thinker so that one day he's not replacing, my political views with the next person that he's going to look up to. I want him to always question. Right. So how do we do that?
Ask questions. You guys are lawyers. Y'all ask questions all the time, right? You don't ask leading questions, but you ask questions that help them to think. So you don't want to ask them yes/no questions. You want to ask them questions like, so if you're reading a book, what do you see in this picture? How does this person feeling in this picture if you're reading a book? And then as they get older, and you really start having deeper conversations, always asking questions that help them to think through their own, using their own mind and the things that they know. I mean, I think too, you want to also instill in our kids that we don't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? We don't have all the answers, but guess what? There are books we can read. If you want to know more about this, let's go find a book together and we can read about it together. And as they get older and they have questions, encouraging them to read and to keep asking questions. I think questions are just a powerful, powerful way to put it back on the other person to think. I mean, my son sometimes is like, just tell me the answer. And I'm like, no, you have a brain. You can figure this out. You are so intelligent. You are so smart. But I think too, questions also help our children to learn emotional intelligence as well. So asking questions like, how do you feel? Or what feeling does this bring up for you? Even things like, how is your body responding to what you're seeing on the TV? Oh, I'm getting hot. I just feel like I feel tense, like my hands are shaking. What does that mean to you? Well, I feel like I feel anger, right? So they also get to have that emotional intelligence as well when you ask them questions and let them work through the questions, um, and fight the urge just to give them an answer. Because that's when you start kind of telling your kids how to think like you. It's when you just give them the answer. And that's what they're getting in school right now. I don't know how many teachers leave it open for kids to ask questions and then, you know, really kind of have an inquiry. You want to have maybe like you want to develop in our kids. We want to develop in our kids a sense of inquiry, a sense of curiosity, um, to understand more, to be curious and to look for more and to look beyond us as parents. But then you also want to give them boundaries, right? Because there are some things that personally, I feel like this is what I feel. I feel as long as children feel loved, as long as they feel secure, as long as they feel safe and they can trust their home base, then it's really hard for outside forces to sway them. And when you teach your children to think for themselves and to pay attention, to listen to their intuition, listen to their inner voice, then when they're faced with things that really are not, they're like, "Ooh, that doesn't sound right. I can't put my finger on what it is, but it just doesn't sound right to me. So this is something I'm not going to, you know, align myself with or engage in." Um, so yeah, I mean, I think asking lots of questions, because those questions, like I said, lead to all these different things. It leads to emotional intelligence. It leads to a sense of inquiry. It leads to self reliance. They learn to trust themselves, um, and then have discussions with them. So like you can pose a question and then let them ask you a question, and you know, and have a discussion like we're having right now. You know, like let's talk about this. And you might find out your kids have a different a thought than you do, and that is okay, and acknowledge that that's okay. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of this is parents modeling behavior, not being afraid to have these conversations, trying to, you know, to release that shame and guilt, to not pass it on to our children. So yeah.
Thank you, Adalia. Jeanette, do you have any other questions?
I don't. Mm-mm.
No?
Yeah, this was so amazing. I'm so grateful to you. I know we have a lot of friends and family and parent clients of ours that are appreciating this so much. I will be sure to share your contact information, the links to follow Adalia and follow her programs on the comments section. And if you have any resources that we can share with parents regarding where they can find the educational materials, where they can find possibly good books and movies, we'd love to share that as well. I really would like to thank our mutual friend, Eklund Mercy, who led me to you. And she is a Black friend that I am proud to be an ally on her side anytime. And I appreciate her bringing you to us. And Jeanette, thank you for joining and being so vulnerable and so raw with, this is incredibly sensitive for a white parent with a Black child. I can really feel that as well. And same for you, Adalia, just having a, being mixed. And for myself, as a minority, I've definitely have dealt with a lot of resilience, but I have to say that I can never pretend to know what it must be like to be Black in this country. It's a completely different journey, and it humbles me in what I can do. But I appreciate you making us feel that there's permission for us to put a step forward
Oh, yeah.
and do something. And it's okay for us to get it wrong. And I vow to be open to the feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so I did want to say that parents who want, there's a great website. It's called embracerace.org.
Okay, we're going to put that in the comments section.
Yeah, put embrace race, it's all one word, .org. It's a wonderful website. I found it as I was kind of, making sure, looking up information and stuff. And we actually used it for some books they have there. We've used it for books we've gotten for our son.
Oh, great.
So they have this whole article. It's 31 books. I think it was some that deal with race or that feature children of other races. And they go through and they give a synopsis of each book. So yeah, that would be a great resource to start with for parents.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And for anybody that listened to this, I really do hope that this will engage us to do the minimum that we can do, which is at least do right by our children and raise them to be socially conscious and race conscious.
Right.
Ladies, thank you again so much for joining me, and thank you for everybody that watched, and we will be sharing all the resources and information in the comments section.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.